The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoneman and I'm your host on this program. I'm also the Ward 3 Alderman here in the city of Nashua. And we bring you perspectives in order to keep you informed on issues that are happening in our city, in our state, and on a national level too. Because as elections roll around, we want to make sure that you, the voter and taxpayer in the city of Nashua, is informed about the issues that we're facing. Well, today is October 30th, and we have a municipal election coming up next week, next Tuesday on November 7th, 2017. And one of the key issues that the city is dealing with in 2017 on this ballot is the question of the Performing Arts Center. There's been a lot of talk about it, a lot of meetings about it, and a lot of what many call misinformation about it. Well, we want to take a look at some of the facts on the show today. With me to talk about the Performing Arts Center is my friend and a Nashua taxpayer, Chris Johnson. Chris lives in Ward 3. We've talked about the Arts Center many times, and I think that his opinions are representative of what many people in the ward that I've spoken with seem to think. Chris, welcome and thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So we have spoken a lot about the Arts Center, and you've got some opinions about it, and I'm sure many people have spoken to you about the Arts Center, certainly as they've spoken to me. So my first question to you is, why do you hate the arts?
It's funny you should ask that, because that's been framed more than once.
Yes.
Absolutely, I am as big a supporter of the arts as anyone who lives in your ward or that you're going to meet. I've been a musician my entire life. I grew up on the stage in acting productions. I even was in a production of The Nutcracker with Gate City Ballet 5 years ago.
That's great.
So I am as big of a supporter of the arts as you're going to find.
Okay.
Really what we need to think about is whose role is it to provide arts in a community? And how does that affect us as the taxpayers here in Nashua?
Right. And what we hear a lot about is that we're facing this choice about, do we want to have an arts center or not? The conversation is being framed yes or no on an arts center, and it sounds like you really are not against the arts, and you're not against having an arts center, but yet you're against this particular proposal. So are we dealing with an arts center question here, or what are we really dealing with?
Absolutely. The question has become very binary, and by that I mean it's yes or no. Are you for the arts or are you against the arts? Take or leave this one proposal that's been put in front of the Board of Aldermen, and even when the discussion was happening in the Aldermanic Chamber, the discussion really centered around whether or not the Arts Center was right for downtown Nashua.
Right.
I've run into almost no one who feels the Arts Center would be negative for downtown Nashua or for any other location within our city. Mm-hmm. It simply comes down to a budget discussion and a bonding issue in front of the Board of Aldermen, and that I've always felt was inadequately addressed by a business plan that doesn't make, frankly, much business sense.
Right, right. Well, this is a political issue, and Nashua is a very political town, and politics, what I've learned in my 4 years on the board, more than I even knew before, is that spin seems to guide the day. And we really have a question of a bonding issue here, an issue of the city undertaking some debt to pay for something, more so than a question about an arts center. In fact, I have the wording here from the ballot. Next week on Tuesday the 7th, we're going to be asking the voters this question: shall the Board of Aldermen pass the following resolution? And it says, this resolution authorizes the mayor and the city treasurer to issue bonds not to exceed the amount of $15,500,000. $15.5 million for the Performing Arts Center located at 201 Main Street. So it's not a question about do we want an arts center or not, because I think, as you say, and everyone I speak to says sure. I mean, no one's against it. Some people may be a little more passionate about it, a little bit less passionate because maybe they would use it or not use it, but no one says we don't want it. And to frame the conversation as do we want an arts center or not is really disingenuous, in my opinion. It's about a bond.
Right. I think the key point of discussion and possibly confusion related to the ballot issue, and you see this on signs that are popping up around the city saying vote yes for the Performing Arts Center. This is not a question of whether you are in favor of an arts center or in favor of the arts in any capacity. This is simply asking, is it the right move right now for Nashua, for our government to issue $15.5 million worth of bonds to facilitate the establishment of an arts center in a former retail establishment on Main Street that no one likes to see sitting empty?
Right.
And that's really what it comes down to, is that the right place? Is it even the right place for an art center if the city were going to put one in?
Right. I've talked to a lot of folks about this, and while I believe the majority of the Ward 3 voters and taxpayers will not support this, that's just my belief, and that's why I voted in the Board of Aldermen meeting the way that I did. I try to get a sense. Now, the reasoning that each person may have had may have been a little bit different. And I can kind of summarize what some of those points are. Some people say that the old Alex Shoe building is not the right location. They may be okay with the other aspects of it, but they don't like that location. Others, and probably the majority who are against it, say they don't like the idea of the $15.5 million bond. Others might say that they don't like the business plan. And the business plan question is at issue too, because if we were to pass this, we're not only endorsing borrowing money to build the project, and there are some triggers. We can talk about the triggers, the $4 million endowment, that kind of thing, but not only endorsing the bond to build it, but the plan to operate this thing. And running an arts center is not for the amateur, really. There are local theater production companies where there might be amateur actors, but the folks who run that, I don't think are amateur, because it's serious business.
Absolutely.
And it's very hard, I think, to make money at it.
I would 100% agree that it's not a business where it's going to be easy to make money. I am certainly not an expert in running an arts center, nor would I purport to be. Right. But I am a businessman. I understand business models. I help clients who are looking for debt, help them go find that debt. And I see business plans all the time. And I look at the one that was in the model that's being used as the sales pitch for this Performing Arts Center. And the 5-year pro forma financial statements that it shows, the 5th year is the most successful year with a bottom line of $54,000, which is already $20,000 less, roughly, than the building pays to the city coffers in real estate taxes today. Not to mention the fact that it has no debt service coverage, which is approximately $1 million per year for 20 years.
That's on us.
And that's coming out of the general fund. And there's also a discussion that because of old bonds rolling off, that this bond won't actually increase the city's overall debt load. Therefore, there won't be an increase in the tax rate to cover this bond, which I actually was happy to hear that when I heard it. However, that just means that the next thing that happens will cause the rates to increase, because there will be no additional capacity in the general fund to service something like that.
Right, exactly. And it's true that we are retiring some debt. What's being retired is the 2 high schools. We have bonds for the 2 high schools. Those are nearing their payoff times at this stage. And so this debt is coming off. We borrowed a lot of money for those 2 schools. The way I look at it, though, I don't know how you would look at it in your household, but if I had borrowed money to buy a new car and I had a payment of $350 a month for 5 years, I get to the end, I pay that last payment. What's the next thing I'm going to do? Am I going to say to myself, great, I've got $350 I can now kick into savings for the new roof I need later? Or should I say, you know, I'm so used to paying this much in debt. Why don't we just borrow some more money and keep paying this? Because it's not going to affect the way we're living every day. Well, it will affect the way we're living every day. And so in my household, we would not just go spend the money just because we finished paying something off.
Sure. I feel the same way. Again, it comes down to how much money is coming into the city. There's a finite amount of money every year that comes into the city. If we pay off some old bonds, what we've done is we've given ourselves some breathing room in the event that there's an emergency that needs to be addressed in the city. That we need to issue a new bond because something has to be addressed. Therefore, we can address that without having to raise everyone's rates in a way that we wouldn't have had to do if we gave ourselves some breathing room.
Right. It gives us some flexibility for the future.
Exactly right. And that's strictly addressing this from the bonding perspective, which you've heard from some of your constituents.
Right.
And I completely understand that. I completely respect that. I understand the other side saying that it's within the capacity, therefore it won't raise the tax rate, but I just don't think that's a way to live.
I don't think it's a way to live, and I put that in the category of spin. Again, it's making a situation look one way when really you'd be inclined to look at it a little differently. And we do have some situations arising in the city coming up that may require some bonding. First off, we just not too long ago passed a resolution to bond paving. That was $37.5 million over 5 years, and that first 5 years is covered essentially by motor vehicle fees, registrations. I went to register our cars today, and I know where my money's going. But once the first 5 years of a 10-year program is done, there's not going to be that slack in registration fees to cover the next 5 years, because there's another $37.5 million bond coming down the road, so to speak. So where's that money going to come from? Well, I think we should plan for that, because otherwise, when we get to that point, if the road fees aren't there, then we're going to have to raise taxes to pay for it, because all of this money, whether it's a current budget cycle or bonded debt, it's all taxpayer money. And of course, we also have, we heard about on September 12th in the Aldermanic meeting, we heard about the Elm Street Middle School as a school that might need some renovations to the tune of around $40 to $50 million. So these are things that are going to be high on our priority list and will take up some of that capacity. So we should maybe hang on to that capacity and not spend it right away.
I completely agree. The other concern that I have really revolves around the value that would be produced in the art center itself. The $1.5 million to purchase the building, $15.5 million total to renovate and get it operational. For one building on Main Street that's sitting on a small plot of land, when the entire Daniel Webster College campus, 13 buildings on 53 acres, was just sold at auction for about $12.5 million. Right. It gives me pause to wonder about the value that we're actually going to be receiving for our $15.5 million. Yes. Understanding that at the end of 20 years, the city will own that facility. However, first of all, if there's not a buyer for an art center, owning a building doesn't really have much value. But second of all, if the facility is only worth half what we paid for it, I think we need to reconsider how we're investing those funds for the future of the city. Yeah. And I've heard it said that if we don't make these types of investments, then shame on us. But I think that if we make them foolishly and without really giving thought to the future, then even more shame on us. Yeah, $50 million, not only is it a bond that has implications, but it's a lot of money. And when you, especially as you say, when you compare that to Daniel Webster College selling for $12.5. Now, we can't say, don't want to necessarily reopen the question about should the city buy Daniel Webster College, but as a comp, let's say, it's a valuable piece of information, because here's this 53 acres on all those buildings was purchased for $12 million, and now here we're talking about this tiny little plot of land, really making renovations to a building that would be worth a couple $1 million or so for 15. That's quite a bit of money. What about the economic benefit to the city in terms of added business and making the city more attractive? Is that a factor that you think is important? It is something that I think is important. And my wife and I are not originally from Nashua, and it's one of the things that drew us to Nashua. Sure. Is the fact that downtown is vibrant. Same here. I didn't notice the fact that we didn't have an art center. It didn't come into the discussion for us. However, the fact that there are plenty of places to go out to eat, that there are plenty of things for us to do, made a difference. We're from a much larger market originally, and it made it much easier for us to come here and really get involved in things in Nashua. I think that anything that drives more people into town to spend money with our vendors, with our retailers, I think is good for the city. Right. From a perspective of directly benefiting the city, there's not as much one. The city makes money off of the value of the buildings downtown. The revenues that the city earns does not necessarily go up just because a building goes from being unused to being rented. Right, because taxes due no matter what. Correct. That's absolutely correct. There's certainly an economic driver downtown. Yes. Especially with restaurants. That's the biggest discussion point that I've heard, specifically related to people going out before or after events at the Arts Center. And I completely support our downtown vendors, restaurateurs, and retailers. And I think that's a fantastic way to get more people driving to downtown to rent those buildings. But from a direct financial effect to the city, there's not one. Right. It's not necessarily revenue into City Hall. Correct. And that's what I mean by that. Sure. There's no general fund effect by having more economic activity downtown.
True. But I think that there is, as I think you do too, there is an effect or a benefit to having a vibrant downtown.
100% agree.
That vibrancy puts Nashua on the map. And I think when we look at downtown, we've seen stores close over time. It's hard to see that. It's painful. And we don't want to see the city languish. And I think as a downtown goes, so goes the rest of the city. And there are many people who say, well, I don't live downtown. Why should I be concerned with that? But I think we really do need to be concerned about it. So the Arts Center, I think, could have some very positive benefit. So again, we're not against doing an arts center. It's just we're trying to find the right plan because you don't want to start something that's going to fail. It has to succeed, and the $15 million price tag is pretty high. But I think most people do feel that there would be overall benefit, if not to the city in terms of tax dollars, certainly to the overall effect. We look at what's been done in Concord, for instance, and Capitol Center for the Arts is right there on Main Street. And Capitol Center, I mean, the whole Concord Main Street downtown is beautiful. And it seems to have a life that we don't seem to have here. Manchester, I think, is very similar. Now, did you go to the theaters up in Concord and Manchester?
I have not been in Concord. I have been to the Palace Theater many times in Manchester.
And it's quite successful, and it seems to do a lot for the area.
It is. It does. Certainly, they do a fantastic job of bringing in big name shows. I've seen shows there that you'd pay to go see on Broadway.
Wow.
Rent, Spam-A-Lot. Shows like that they're big name shows, and when they host those shows, their normal local artists don't get to perform a lot of the big roles because they actually draw from the off-Broadway crowd who are looking to pad resumes and get an opportunity to launch themselves onto Broadway by starring in some of these well-known shows.
Well, those are two theaters, the Palace and Capitol Center for the Arts, that are often held up as examples of the kind of thing that we could have here. I had a conversation with the gentleman who runs the Palace Theater in Manchester and with the woman who runs the Capitol Center for the Arts in Concord. Both very informative as I was approaching the aldermanic vote. I wanted to get a sense from them, maybe cutting through some of the politics, talking to someone who may not be quite as politically wrapped up in what we're doing down here. And they've both been following what's going on down here. And the point that each of them made, to me, which I thought was impressive, was that it's not just for fun. It's a business, a very serious business, and it involves very serious fundraising efforts. The budgets for these theaters seem to run about 70%, 75% based on ticket sales, and the remaining 25% is based on fundraising. Capitol Center for the Arts, by the way, doesn't get a dime from the city of Concord. No subsidies.
Interesting.
But they're having to really work hard to get the fundraising going. And when I saw that gentleman stand up in the aldermanic chamber on September 12th and offer to pledge $100, that's the first $100 that has ever been pledged, so far as I know, in getting an arts center going. One of the complaints that I've heard from folks in Ward 3 is that, where's this group's money? This group that's advocating for this, what is their skin in the game, essentially? What are they doing to raise funds to get this thing going? And I haven't heard anything. Have you?
I have not. Not at this point, I have not.
There's talk about getting a $4 million endowment going. The gentleman from the theater in Manchester said raising an endowment is much harder than raising money for construction. He says people want their names on buildings, et cetera. And so you can raise money, he said, much more easily for a capital expenditure right off the bat than you can to keep an operation going.
And I've attended the fundraising events at the Palace Theater in Manchester, and when they do these, they shut down Hanover Street in front of the theater, and it's a huge event for them when they have a fundraiser. You're right, it's not a small undertaking, and that's simply to help them manage that theater and keep the theater going.
Yeah, it's hard. So it kind of brings us to the question of who's responsible for keeping this thing going. Is this really going to be a private entity that's going to run this and keep it going, or is it on the taxpayer? What's the role of government in these kinds of questions?
I think that's a very valid question, and I think that at this point we don't really have an answer for that. The way I'll just tell you how I see the role of government. The role of government is to provide services. You want to make sure that your garbage gets picked up. You want to make sure that if you have a giant pothole in your street that they come by and they patch that.
Right.
There are certain things that are just normal services that everyone expects to receive from the government. The role of government is not to make a business successful, that would ordinarily, on its own, not be successful. And that's what I see happening here, where you have an arts center whose annual budget leaves $1 million gap in its ability to fund the debt to cover its own existence. That's the government propping up a business that would not be successful without that government's intervention. And that's how I view. That's the biggest way that I view this.
Yeah. We've had a lot of conversation about rail around the city of Nashua, and there's been a lot of debate. I think it's very similar. That's why I'm raising the issue. The state should spend $4 million of free money, to do more studies, and then the state should spend $200 million to build the thing, and then the city should spend $10 million a year to subsidize it. And those efforts did not work. The money wasn't spent, and pretty much the state legislature and the governor said, we're not going to do that. But then along comes a private entity that has figured out a way to make money at it on their own dime, and they're working on that. And we signed this memorandum of understanding to begin pursuing a for-profit rail. But it wasn't the same plan, because that same old plan isn't going to be a moneymaker, and no one wants to take it on. So why should government take it on? Well, the same thing could be true here with the Arts Center, where we have a plan that really from the get-go is not able to support itself. And maybe if we don't approve of this, maybe there will be a plan that comes along that can be supported. And then maybe there might be more interest on the private side for supporting.
I certainly hope so. And if we as a city decide that we do want to go ahead and proceed with the 201 Main Street location for an arts center, and 5 years from now it is there and it's operating successfully, no one's going to be more excited about that than I am.
Sure.
I would love to see that.
Right.
And it's not that I don't think that it could happen in Nashua. I am concerned that we don't yet have the right plan to make that a reality.
Okay.
That's what gives me pause. Is
Sure.
Have we laid the correct foundation for success in the future?
Well, let's talk for a moment about path forward. What's going to happen on Tuesday? This is going to be voted up or voted down. It's a non-binding resolution.
Which I think is an important thing to remember, that this is not, you as a resident of Nashua, as a taxpayer and a voter in Nashua, you're not holding your city accountable on Tuesday. You're simply providing your voice
on a bond.
On a bond, whether you think that this $15.5 million bond is the right direction for the city.
Right. Because we're really faced, like you said, with a binary choice, a take it or leave it choice at this point. And I mentioned some of the things that some of the folks in Ward 3 have said they might not like. There's no fundraising yet. There's not an art center director named yet. It's too expensive. It's the wrong location. Some people may disagree with all of those, but it might be kind of a smattering of people here and there have various issues. So if this passes, I think the expectation, well, Alderman Moriarty said it very well in the candidate forum, Alderman at Large forum, when he was asked, is he going to support it? Well, if there's 66% of the vote that supports it, which would sort of equate to the 2/3 of the Board of Aldermen in favor of it, then yeah, he's certainly going to vote for it. So if there's a 66% to 37 or whatever the number is probably going to go forward as is. But I'm not anticipating that'd be a huge margin. I think it's more likely to be a point head on this side or that side.
I can't disagree with that at all. I think this is going to be a close vote.
Yeah.
I think that it's something that you're going to see people who would normally not want to say yes to the bond, but because they're passionate enough about this that they're going to vote yes anyway. And I think that it's going to be a much closer vote than either side at this point really gives this credit for. I think that you're going to see the city very closely divided.
Right. Well, it is a very divisive issue, and I think that's unfortunate too. I'd like to think that we had a proposal that 66 or 75% or 80% of the population could get behind. But unfortunately, this is a very divisive issue, and I think the spin that we talked about or that I see kind of contributes to that, because no one likes to realize that they're being spun.
Right.
And as soon as you hear that, you'd say, I don't want your spin.
Right.
But it's all spin.
Well, and that comes back to your discussion about the path forward and how to make this successful. Yeah. The easiest way to make the Arts Center successful is for the path and the plan to have as broad a support as possible.
Absolutely right.
If this is a 51% to 49% vote in favor of the Arts Center, it just tells me that there's enough of the population of Nashua who are not interested in this path,
Right.
that getting them to come back and support that center is going to be a challenge. And the last thing an art center needs is challenges before it ever gets off the ground.
Right. You need to have good public relations. You need to be popular. Goodwill, basically. You need
Correct.
to have goodwill among the population. And if we don't have that, it's not going to succeed. So I'm hoping that the path forward, if this wins or loses, I'm hoping that it goes back to committee. Frankly, I liked Alderman Clemens' motion to put it on a ballot. I voted against it. I was a little surprised. It came at 11:40 at night. It was quite late in the evening. But I expected it to be a motion to send it back to committee for rework. And that's what I would have favored. Because I'd be remiss if I wanted this thing to die. If it loses 51-49, I don't want it to die any more than I think it should automatically go forward as is if it wins 51-49. If it loses 51-49, I don't want it to go away, because I think an arts center can have the benefit that we've discussed.
Well, I think if it loses 51-49, that's where we as a people go, as a city, go back to the drawing board.
Exactly.
And we figure out, how do we convert this 51-49 to an 85-15?
Exactly.
And that's the key.
I think that's possible. We have to take a closer look at maybe what the location is. We should take a closer look at what the total cost is. What do we want this thing to be? Can it really be everything? It's going to be this multi-use center. Is it really possible to make something that can serve every single purpose?
Right.
We should also take a look at getting the fundraising going. And we should maybe establish some of those acts that we might want to attract in the future into some of the venues that we already have. We have the Keefe Auditorium and we have Court Street. And I think that maybe some of these venues could be used for some of these acts that we want to get.
Well, at a bare minimum, the existing theaters can be used to prime the pump.
Yes.
For the endowment or for additional capital fundraising, or however those funds end up getting used. Those two theaters could certainly be used to begin putting money aside in the coffers for use for the development of a performing arts center.
Right, so there is a way forward. I believe very strongly that there's a way forward. And I've heard from folks who didn't like that I voted the way that I did, but they understand. They still support me in the election, but they want us to take a look at this. And we can't let this thing go away. I think it's a great idea, because as downtown goes, so does the city. And
it is the face of our town.
It's the face of our town. We want Nashua to be well known and to look good. So we have to work on those things, and I hope that we can.
I agree.
If we hadn't put this on the ballot, I think we'd be talking about those things right now. But the resolution was to put it on the ballot, so we really have to wait until after the election to see what happens. Well, Chris, we're pretty much out of time here. Any summation you want to make for people who are considering this issue? What's the overall issue that you're telling people to consider when they're...
The main thing I want anyone to remember is this is about how the city spends money. It's not about whether you as a resident or I as a resident am in favor of an arts center or in favor of the arts or anything related to the arts. This is a spending question, not an arts question.
Right, so I started out asking you why you hate the arts. And you don't hate the arts, I don't hate the arts. And the folks at home that may vote no for this, they don't hate the arts either.
Correct.
And it's really about bonding and about a business plan. And I think these are things we need to take a very, very careful look at.
Agreed.
Well, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank the folks at home, too, for tuning in today. I've been talking today with Chris Johnson, who is a Nashua resident and voter and taxpayer, about the Arts Center and about government philosophy overall in terms of spending on businesses that might often be run as a private entity and as money that's needed for downtown development. Where do we really spend our money? Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.